Hey guys, I'm Drago and welcome to another speed paint. I found this dragon last year on Artfight, but I didn't have time to draw him then. He's been in my bookmark since last year and I decided to finally get to him this year. And with luck, his owner was on Team Vampires. So with me being on Team Werewolves, I decided to give him a go this year. I absolutely adore this design with the skull and all that, the lovely sort of galaxy nebula wings, the skeleton tail with the blade on the end, the glowing chest with the souls inside. Just an absolutely amazing design that I had to draw, and I'll be taking you guys through the process. So, first things first, I know I wanted a bit more of a complicated pose. So I did something that I do for my large pieces, which is use a blue outline and sketch out a rough frame of what I'm going for. Essentially, they're my construction lines. I had a cropped flipped image of his head next to me, just helped me get the right shapes without having to constantly zoom out and look at the reference. Once I was happy with these construction lines, I moved on to the refined sketch. This is where I properly put in all the shapes, making sure I've got a solid foundation to put my line work over. Without this solid foundation, line work can end up looking a bit rough, because I have to guess where things are going otherwise. But if I had this smooth, detailed, clean sketch, then I know where my lines are going and I can do the nice smooth movements. Make sure my lines are properly smooth and curved. It took a lot of adjusting for me to get the wings how I wanted them. I ended up having to change the canvas size a lot. Even though it seemed like I had it the right size to start off with, I realised that the wings wouldn't have been spread out enough. So I ended up making it a much wider canvas so I could then spread out those wings and make them a bit more realistic. I honestly struggled with the bone tail for a while. I would have thought this would be easy for me because it's kind of segmented, and I have a character that has a segmented tail that I've drawn a few times before. His name is Anomaly, he's my FNAF OC. So I thought this would be fairly easy for me, but I had a lot of trouble with it. It took me quite a few goes to get it right. I ended up basically just doing it in a solid way, and then use lines to cut off the segments, and then use my eraser to erase where those segments, the joints would be. After a lot of fiddling around, a lot of experimentation, and a lot of trying to figure out how the bone tail joins to the back, because in the reference the wings kind of cover it up, I think I got it somewhere where it was decent. I also realised that there are things that I could amend in the line-up. Moving on to the lines, I started with his eye and worked outwards. As I went, I thickened some areas. I made sure to use my pressure sensitivity on my tablet so that I could get this nice line weight variation going on. One thing that I always recommend to artists, if you're looking at your line work and you feel like it looks boring and flat compared to how your sketch looked, always try add line weight variation. It is such a good way to make your line art just pop. So yeah, if you feel like your line art is never as good as your sketch, give that a go. That's my number one tip I can give you. Another thing I tend to do is use quite a few different layers when I'm doing my line work. If I've got lines that are going to overlap, then I do them on a separate layer, so erasing those overlapping areas is so much cleaner and easier. Then at the end I just merge it all back into one layer. There are also areas where I deliberately overlap my lines. These tend to be parts where the shape ends in a point and I need that point to be as sharp as possible. For example, the spines on its back. So I let my lines overlap and then I just erase down right to that point and you get this nice sharp, clean area. Doing his feet is an example of how I do kind of edit my sketches I do line art. Here I added the knuckles and such of the toes, or fingers, or I don't know what you would call them on a dragon. You'd think I'd know considering I'm all about dragons. I mean, I'm literally talking to you right now as a dragon, but I don't. I just think they're cool. Funny story, there's a reason why I initially chose my name. My original username, Dragoness Animations, I chose because, well, I absolutely love dragons and I want to do animations. However, I thought if I was just Dragon Animations, people would think I was a guy. So I decided to go Dragon S Animations to show that sort of female, I guess. You know, she, her pronouns. But people still always refer me as he and him, so it didn't really work out. Anyways, I'm much more happy with just being Drago now, honestly. Makes me feel a lot more comfortable. At this point I now have a drake rather than a dragon, so it's time to add his wings. I use a line work layer to do this at first. Now on Paint Tool Side 2, a line work layer is where you can sort of auto-generate your line using different points that you click. It curves it automatically for you and it's a great way of getting these really smooth curves just how you need them. You can also hold control and just edit the points and the curves as you need to. So on the wings I used the line work layer. It helped me get the smooth curves of the joints that I needed. Once I had those general shapes, I then went on to actually doing it more by hand. This was good for adding on those little knobbly areas of the wings. This boy has very bony wings, and I guess it makes sense considering he's literally got a skull and a bone tail. I don't usually draw bony wings like this, so this was all new to me. But it was really fun. Once all my lines were done, I started colouring. I put down the base colour of his body, and then used my selection wand around the line art. Then I did Ctrl X. This makes it so only the dragon is coloured in. From there I can use clipping masks for the rest of the colouring. If you don't know what a clipping mask is, it's where you can make a layer on top of your base layer, and anything you do will not go outside of that base layer. So you could draw a circle and then say you want to put a stripe on it. You can make a clipping mask above the circle, and no matter where you draw that stripe, it will only be on the circle, it will not be anywhere else on the canvas. Very helpful tool to use. Now Seth has this kind of lighter outline around his patterns, so what I did is I selected the empty space around the pattern, I then inverted that selection, and I then expanded it by some pixels. This way I could fill in a sort of outline around each pattern. I then used the Gaussian blur filter just to sort of blur it out a little bit and blend it nicely. Once I'd done all that, I then took my eraser that has a bit of opacity to it and used my pressure sensitivity again to sort of gradient and fade out the areas that needed it, because if you look on the reference, the patterns do sort of fade out a little bit. Once all the base colouring was done, it was time to texture him. Now I always use my watercolour brush for texturing, and I have loads of different brush types and textures installed into Paint Tool Side. For the bony texture, I decided to use my block brush. I use a darker tone in areas, especially within the mouth, and I use a yellowy tone for sort of some rough highlights, but also just some nice variation in colour. I did the same for the tail, did all the gradient in that I needed to do, and then it was time for the wings. Now, I didn't exactly know how to approach the wings at first, so I opened up a new canvas so I could do a bit of experimenting. I messed around with brushes and immediately found that my mist scatter brush worked really well for the main nebula area. Once I figured that out, it was figuring out what would work for the actual patterns within it. At first I messed around with different brushes, but then I realised they were all looking a bit too rough, so I ended up just using my normal brush and blurring it out. And then I had loads of starred brushes to choose from. The scatter brush is so helpful. Once I was happy, I moved on to doing it on the main piece. Once all that was in, I started on the background. I recently installed some new nebula brushes that I decided to try out on this piece. Went for a nice spacey background. Once I was done with the background, I moved on to lighting. I tend to do the background first before I start shading because then I can get a general idea of how my light's going to be in the piece. I chose purple to pink shades. This way it fit the sort of spacey background. I always start shading roughly at first. These are shadows and highlights that I use my blur brush in the end to blend in, giving the soft shadows and softer highlights. Once I've done those and I'm happy with how the lighting's going, I move on to my more refined shading. This is where I use my simple clean pencil brush and just put in harder shadows. These are ones that I either don't blur or just blur very slightly. It allows for harder shadows and highlights and just makes the piece pop a bit better. I then went around with light blues and pinks just to highlight the edges of areas. Once I was finally happy, I exported the image onto one layer, re-adding it in so that I could start to do some blurring effects. Essentially, I just wanted to blur around the edges of the dragon. That way it would look like some parts are moving. It would also help the tail to look like it is a bit backwards into the background a little bit more than the rest of the body. Like the dragon is leaping forward a little bit. Just helped add a bit of 3D-ness to the piece. And once I'd finished all that, Seth was done in all his glory. I am actually quite happy with the result. It's been a long time since I did a galaxy background and I'm happy that I remembered how to do it because I think it actually looks really nice. Putting that lighter overlay layer over the top of it did really nice to make those colours pop a bit more with a bit more contrast. This dragon was so much fun to draw. In a way, I wish I'd done it a different pose so that he was rearing upwards. That way his stomach and chest would have been visible and I could have done that amazing soul-like skulls that are within his chest because I think that is an amazing idea for a part of his design. But with what I did, I hope that I did Seth justice because he deserves it. I mean, look at this boy. Seth is owned by Final Shock now, so all credit to them for the character, as well as the designer of the character who is Ventura Noir. Links to them will be in the description below. Let me know in the comments if you think I did do Seth justice in this piece. Thanks for watching, please make sure to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Pop those notifications on, you're going to know when I upload. I'm going to try upload every Wednesday and Saturday. So yeah, that's all from me for today. Thanks again and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!